So let's start at the very beginning with what is economics. Why not? Basically, it's the study of how communities of human beings, whether you work at the micro level of a village or at the level of a state or a nation or the whole world, really doesn't matter, because the subject matter is the following. How do people in communities organize the production and distribution of goods and services? The food, clothing, shelter we need to survive has to be produced. It doesn't fall, a pair of pants don't fall from the sky. And even food for a large community is no longer something you can pick off a bush or find in the forest. You have to produce it. You have to use human labor and natural resources, land, water, soil, and so on. You put together the means of production, Marx's language, but it's common in other frameworks as well. You use natural resources, means of production. You put them together with human labor, brain and muscle, and you get outputs. Food, clothing, shelter, entertainment, transportation, medical care, whatever you want. And economics is the study of how you organize that production and then how you organize the distribution of what you have produced among the people in the community that is doing the production. That's it. That's what economics has always been about. For most of human history, economics was not recognized as a distinct object of study. It was rather understood as part of life and not separated out. So, for example, if you go back to philosophy, if you're a philosophy person, if you go back to Plato and Aristotle, you won't find them writing about economics. On the other hand, if you read Aristotle and Plato, they're talking about the production and distribution of goods and services all the time. But it wasn't separated out. It's like human beings have had conversations about their dreams for many, many centuries. But only, with Freud do you begin to get a science of the dream and what it tells you about human cognition and all the rest. So economics only with capitalism emerges out of the general study of life to become a topic of its own. And the reason is linked with capitalism, because before that, you had systems where it was kind of transparent, you might say, to people that they were producing and distributing and consuming goods and services. It was such a regular part of life that it didn't get a lot of attention. You might say it was like drinking some water. Human beings need to drink water, and all around us, we and the people we're with are drinking water all the time because we feel thirsty and we slake our thirst by drinking. Okay, human beings make things, grow things, rear animals, make pots and pans, and so on. So, for example, in an ancient village, you had historically sedimented ways of doing it. The family that made the bread for everybody in the village would typically have the children continue to make the bread for the children of everybody else. And so it would, the people who raised the animals, you had divisions of labor along lines of age, along lines of gender, along lines of whatever other variables the community used to organize. The women might do this kind of work, the men that kind of work, children this kind of work, elderly, and so on. Capitalism, let me take other example. Master-slave. In the centuries of slavery around the world, you organized it in a kind of interesting way, which was immediately naturalized. Some people were masters, kind of small number, and a large number were slaves. and the slaves did the work. It kind of went with the definition of slave. And the masters took over everything because they had to own the output, because they owned the inputs and they owned the worker, because that's what slave means. And so the people in charge, who owned everything, organized the slaves to do the work. They would take part of the output of the slaves, give it back to the slaves so they could eat and be warm in the winter and clothe themselves, etc., to keep on functioning. And they took the rest for themselves. And then you had feudalism. I'm doing a lot of history in a short amount of time. And there again, you had lords and serfs. The lords a small number, the serfs a very large number. The serfs did the bulk of the work. They weren't owned by the lords. It wasn't slavery. That's why it has a different name. But it was similar in this naturalized notion. This is just the way the world is. And you had the beginnings of a questioning in the Middle Ages, because there was a memory that it was once slavery, and it isn't anymore. They're beginning to get a sense of progress, of shifting, of changing. You can find it in St. Augustine. You can find it in Thomas Aquinas. If you look at the people who were reflective, they, of course, were Roman Catholic clerics, because that's what was literate at that time. That's what kept records. That's what had the social position to reflect on life. It was the church. That's the way that society was organized, but that also seemed God's will, nature's will, whatever you want. Now comes capitalism, and capitalism is different in a way that creates the field of economics. What capitalism does is declare, and it's a long explanation of why, but you might want to go into that.